Hello, and welcome to the Better is Possible series brought to you by Steelcase's Better Futures community. We're excited to have you join us as we explore bold new approaches to address equity, education, and the environment. My name is Eileen Strickland, Director of Impact here at Steelcase, and I have the pleasure of hosting our session today on designing for decarbonization, advancing climate action together. So before I introduce our guest speakers, I'd like to share a little bit about what brings us all together. So the Steelcase Better Futures community is designed to help communities thrive through collective action. It was created to explore, invest, and accelerate bold new ideas and practices in collaboration with organizations around the world. Its work is rooted in partnership, as we are committed to fostering a growing global network of changemakers who work together to learn, share, and make a difference where they live. Our areas of impact include ensuring quality education, reducing inequalities, and inspiring climate action. And this brings us to our session today with Dr. Erica Dodds, climate restoration expert and educator, and Lou Epstein, founder and CEO of Lot 21. So Lot 21 is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, open source platform and resource helping the design community decarbonize the world by advancing climate action across the built environment with design disciplines that shape it. In 2024, Steelcase has signed on as a Lot 21 founding member, and we're excited to host this conversation today with Lou and Erica. Lou is the founder and CEO of Lot 21. Lou's environmental advocacy began when the forestry stewardship movement first emerged decades ago. From contributing to reforestation and advocating for a wider range of climate restoration solutions, the common theme has joined conservation and commerce to sustain both. Before launching Lot 21, Lou led various Steelcase global brands and forward-looking initiatives for over 25 years. Erica serves as Turn Forward's head of team impact and operations. She has worked in the climate space for 7 years, spending most of that time as the COO of a climate restoration advocacy nonprofit. Previously, Erica's career focused on evaluation and international development. She holds a PhD in interdisciplinary evaluation and an MA in international development administration. Seeing the impact of climate change on marginalized communities drives Erica's commitment to effective climate action today. As stated at the opening, my role is Director of Impact here at Steelcase, where we're working with others across the organization to catalyze collective action by reimagining systems and designing strategies that center the well-being of people and the planet. Throughout our conversation with Lou and Erica, we will engage participants with interactive questions using an online platform, so please make sure that you have your phone or web browser handy. After the presentation, we're going to open the floor up for a Q&A session. So to share your questions with us, please use the Zoom Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So you can submit questions there at any point during the webinar, and we'll review them during the Q&A session. So with that, I'd like to welcome Erica and Lou. Thank you for joining us today.
Eileen, thanks so much for the wonderful introduction. It's great to be with all of you. And I want to thank the Better Futures community for inviting us to talk about a topic that impacts all of us. We also want to thank Steelcase for their ongoing support as a Lot 21 founding partner. We understand that climate change can be complicated, and there's limited time in which to stay informed, which can make it seem overwhelming at times. On Lot 21, we follow the science to understand how we got here, where we're headed, and most importantly, what can we do? We focus on solutions that are available now and those in development, and strive to make it easier for everyone to stay informed so that more of us can advance climate action faster and together. Our views of climate change and decarbonization are framed by what we see and hear. And the more we stay informed, the more our views might change. For example, I've planted trees for several decades to support reforestation efforts. At first, it was simple. I wanted to sustain a resource I depended on, hardwoods. and ensure that forests would be available for future generations. But as climate change increased, so did my commitment to reforestation. And that's because trees naturally remove carbon emissions from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. But over the past several years, my information sources continued to expand, and I realized we need more diverse solutions than planting trees alone to fulfill the world's climate pledges and net zero goals. In essence, new information from more diverse sources changed my frame of view. And so, with this in mind, what frames your view? Is it framed around and influenced by the people in your lives or the communities most impacted by climate change? Or is it framed by a growing concern about how we sustain a habitable planet and the natural resources we rely on? Or is it framed by news reports or your direct experiences of more extreme weather events, rising temperatures, and increasing floods and fires caused by climate change? What frames your view of climate change? Is it the impact on people, the planet, or the acceleration of climate change itself?
And this is not a rhetorical question. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Lou, for that great lead in. If everyone could take a moment and scan this QR code that you see on the screen, it'll take you to a poll where we'd really like you to think about what is it that most frames your individual view of climate change. We'll be able to see people's responses live as they uh, as they enter their responses to the poll. So let's see what's happening. We'll give everyone a few minutes to add their thoughts in. All right. Thank you so much for sharing. We will hand it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Erica. That was great to watch happening in real time. 10 years ago, people, planet, and climate were catalysts for the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement is a landmark because, for the first time, a binding agreement brought all nations together to combat climate change and adapt to its effects. And the goal is to limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius, ideally aiming for 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, 10 years later, the latest UN climate change report indicates the world is off track. The last decade was the hottest on record. 2023 was the hottest year, and new data available just from last week indicates 2024 was even hotter. Same time that the Paris Agreement was created, the UN also created the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which we know Steelcase follows. 17 SDGs manifest the intersection of people and planet and climate. And the aim of these goals is, quote, peace and prosperity for people and the planet while tackling climate change and working to preserve oceans and forests. To follow through on the what a goal strives to achieve, we need a framework for how we can achieve it. Lot 21 is focused on goal number 13, and advancing climate action in the built environment with the design disciplines that shape it. These are the three pillars of climate action, and this is the framework that Lot 21 is built upon. Adaptation resists the damaging effects of climate change by deploying more resilient solutions. Mitigation reduces the carbon emitting sources in the built environment that contribute to climate change. And restoration removes the excess carbon that already exists and is trapped in our atmosphere warming our planet. Adaptation and mitigation efforts are better known today. Restoration efforts focus on carbon dioxide removal, also referred to as CDR, which you'll hear more about. The methods, which include natural and technological solutions. So to put this in perspective, we'll use the bathtub analogy. Carbon emissions continue to flow, filling our atmosphere where they have remained for centuries and are warming our planet. So we can adapt to warming temperatures and reduce the flow of carbon emissions. And today we see great examples of climate resilient design and carbon reductions across the built environment. But to restore our climate to safe and healthy conditions, we must also remove the legacy emissions from our atmosphere, essentially drain the tub. And this is relatively new information, even for those who have spent their careers in climate change science. So you're not alone if you're not already familiar with the carbon removal and climate restoration movement. The UN has only begun to acknowledge it in the past 3 years, that CDR must be a part of climate solution portfolios, whereas we've had half a century to talk about the importance of reducing emissions and adapting to climate change. So that's a significant difference. So climate change, how did we get here? The following 3 graphs help frame climate change, its measurement, and where we are now. The first is the Keeling curve. It's named after scientist Charles Keeling, and it maps CO2 concentrations in our atmosphere, the primary cause of global warming. More than a timestamp that illustrates the rapid rise of CO2, this graph portrays humanity living in and out of balance with nature over time. Beginning at 1750, can we go back? Thank you. Beginning at 1750, the beginning of the industrial era, you can see that carbon dioxide in our atmosphere measured around 280 parts per million, ppm. And it bounced along around that amount for a considerable time until we hit the 1900s. And by the mid-1900s, it spiked. Whereas today, it is over 420 parts per million, which represents a 50% increase in a matter of a couple of centuries. What's also important to realize is that carbon dioxide in our atmosphere measured between 280 and 300 parts per million for over 800,000 years, based on scientific records. And so this is a significant spike which has been caused by the industrial era. The next diagram we need is the reverse curve, which illustrates reversing the Keeling curve to restore our climate to healthy and safe pre-industrial era conditions. Reducing carbon emissions can limit the amount of carbon dioxide that's continuing to accumulate in our atmosphere, and that's important. However, removing the legacy carbon dioxide from our atmosphere is essential to reverse the Keeling curve and restore our climate. Going back to the bathtub analogy, draining the tub. Let's put it in a different perspective for a moment. The graphs which we've shown stem from environmental science. They're environmental models. Now let's look at a behavioral model and tap into behavioral science. The Rogers curve, named after sociologist Everett Rogers, is a behavioral model that illustrates change over time in distinct adoption stages. This will be familiar to a lot of folks in marketing and business who are used to the adoption curve for launching new products and understanding what will the adoption rate be over time. The Rogers curve provides a simple way to compare where we are now and how far we must go to reach net zero and reverse the accumulation curve. And so this timeline basically indicates here we are in 2025. Most people have goals to become net zero, carbon neutral by 2050. We have 25 years. We're in the early adopter phase. So to accelerate the adoption of sustainable solutions, they must achieve a similar level of performance and design and price and availability as if it was a product. And that's why we all play a role in the rate of adoption. We are the demand. We need the proper supply to accelerate the curve. One other way to look at it, CDR decades. CDR, again, is carbon dioxide removal. So for this other view about where we are now and what lies ahead, we follow CDR expert Robert Hoagland. Robert is an advisor in carbon dioxide removal and climate policy and is world renowned. And he also took part in the Science Based Target Initiative's Net Zero Expert Advisory Group. Steelcase is a member of the Science Based Targets Initiative and is committed to setting science-based targets that are validated by the organization and aligned with the 1.5 case. Where are we now? We're in the startup phase. And in the 30s, that will be a scale-up phase. And in the 40s, what's referred to soak up is the take up or draw down of the excess carbon dioxide emissions trapped in our atmosphere. So what comes to mind when you think about climate solutions? Take it away,
Again,
Erica.
yes, again, this is not a rhetorical question. So please take a moment to scan the QR code. You've just heard about some ways to frame climate action. So before today, or even right now in this moment, when you think about climate solutions, what are the specific solutions that come to mind? Or what are the actions that you've taken? What are the, when you think about climate solutions, do you just think this is impossible, overwhelming, or do you think that you're inspired? So go ahead and put your responses in, and we'll see those populate live if everything works according to plan. Wow, daunting. Yeah, I definitely feel that. Takes all of us, absolutely. Yeah, a lot of words about how challenging this is, right? It is absolutely a monumental challenge. Future generations, I like that forward thinking. What is it going to look like for our children? Mindset shift, cultural shift, running out of time. Yeah, the timeline here is pretty shockingly short, even though the fact that it is multiple decades makes it hard to spark action sometimes. The 1%, I like that. Impacts of war on the environment, and still overwhelming opportunity. That's a nice one that's growing. Thank you so much for your participation. I think a lot of us resonate with a lot of these responses. Very cool to see.
Yeah, very exciting. Love the interaction. So climate solutions, framing carbon removal. We know that from framing the 17 SDGs, there are 3 pillars of climate action, and we also need a way to frame carbon removal. We need a diverse portfolio of natural and technological solutions to restore our climate to safe and healthy pre-industrial conditions. The solutions illustrated here are from Lot 21's interactive infographic, which you can find on our website, which provides 8 overarching categories with overviews that are very high level and links to dive deeper. And you can dive deeper and deeper into countless sources that we provided on our website. I'm going to hand it off to Erica now, who will walk through some of the solutions that we're going to talk about today and how they all come together towards the end of this presentation.
Thanks, Lou. I wish that I could talk about all of the different categories you see here, but unfortunately, time is a thing. So for the sake of somewhat representative sampling, we'll highlight one natural solution, a technological solution, one that's a hybrid of the two. And then we'll also look at a fourth category here that showcases how these materials can be utilized across the built environment and offers a glimpse of a more climate positive future. Each solution applies these 4 guiding principles that I'm going to discuss to assess the opportunities and challenges based on today's available and constantly evolving science. There are more details about all of these on the Lot 21 website if you're interested in delving more deeply into any of the solutions or how they compare based on these principles. But today we'll just be skimming the surface to give a taste of what's out there and hopefully leave you all feeling a little bit more optimistic than you were a couple slides ago when we did that interactive exercise. So we're going to start with scalability, but for all of these, keep in mind that slide with the bathtub on it. I find that to be a really useful metaphor to keep in mind to better contextualize the solutions and the principles. So starting with scalability, imagine if we wanted to empty the overflowing bathtub of our climate, getting all of that excess CO2 out. And imagine that the tools available to us were a thimble and a bucket. It'd be pretty clear from the outset which would be a better fit for our goal. Similarly, if we want to look at climate solutions with the context that there are nearly 1 trillion tons of excess CO2 in the atmosphere, we really want to look at solutions that could eventually reach a scale of about 10 gigatons of CO2 removal per year in order to make a real dent in that. Not everything is up to the task, but there are a lot of trade-offs. Financeability is the next principle. It's going to be expensive to build a big enough drain for our bathtub or to build tools to drain it effectively. And some people argue that it's too expensive, but ultimately, if we do nothing, we'll have water damage threaten the structural integrity of our whole house. So implementing solutions is imperative, but we still need to be as economical as we feasibly can. We need solutions that are not overly expensive to implement, and if they provide revenue to defray costs by selling CO2 as a value-added product, that's even better. Next is durability. We could splash the water from the bathtub into the air to get it out of the tub, but it would just fall back in. We need solutions that get the water out of the tub, the CO2 out of the atmosphere for a good long time, ideally a century or more. And equity. Who is suffering the most from this overflowing tub? Maybe it's the downstairs neighbors who are living in mold problems caused by our excess water. We should aim to have any solutions provide benefits to those who have suffered the most. This requires that we meaningfully engage with various groups that have been impacted by climate change before, during, and after implementing solutions to ensure that their perspectives are considered and their needs are met. This also means that, as I mentioned, there are trade-offs with scalability, financeability, durability. It's worth thinking about if there are co-benefits for a solution that otherwise fails the scalability test. Those co-benefits could make it very worthwhile to invest heavily in that solution to make sure that we're addressing equity concerns. So I'm going to walk through a few different solutions, and to begin, I'll introduce a solution that you're all familiar with, trees. Forest carbon practices are a collection of actions that we can take to enhance the carbon being removed by and stored in forests. There are 4 main strategies to forest carbon practices. Afforestation is planting trees in places that haven't had forests before. Reforestation is planting trees in areas that were recently deforested. Improved forest management has to do with promoting greater forest biomass and carbon storage. And sustainable forestry management is maintaining and enhancing the value of forests for present and future generations. As Lou reminded us, plants use photosynthesis to draw in CO2 and release oxygen. And what actually happens when that's going on is that the trees are separating the carbon from the oxygen. The oxygen is released while the carbon gets converted into the structure of the tree itself. So with that in mind, it's kind of intuitive that forests of young trees, which grow faster, absorb carbon more quickly, while older trees, which have more carbon-based mass, store more carbon. When a tree's chemical structure is destroyed, like by wildfires or by rotting, the carbon is re-released into the atmosphere. So promoting carbon removal and storage through forests requires that we maintain existing old growth forests, plant new forests in appropriate locations, and decrease the death of existing trees. It's worth noting that the scale of our excess carbon problem is so large that there's not enough arable land on Earth to use trees alone to absorb and store the excess CO2 in our air. that's the bad news. And as the climate continues to worsen, the issues that plague the durability of forests, especially wildfires and droughts and floods, will only get worse. But it's still worthwhile to pursue improved forests. There are many co-benefits both in rural and urban environments. Notably, the urban heat island effect can cause cities with few trees to be up to 7 degrees hotter than similar cities with substantial tree cover. There are advocacy organizations all over the place. My local one is called Canopy, that promote the protection and expansion of trees in urban areas to improve equity in environmental and public health. So now we're going to move on to biomass carbon removal and storage, which is also referred to as bikers. Unlike tree planting, which is a nature-based solution, this is hybrid and it involves both plants and technology. Bikers refers to technologies designed to use biomass to remove excess CO2 from the atmosphere and store it either safely underground or in a product, sometimes creating energy in the process. Note that while trees both absorb CO2 and store it long term, Bikers uses plants to absorb the CO2, but then it burns them to either produce biochar, which stores CO2 much longer than living plants, or to produce energy, capture the resulting CO2 emissions, and pump that CO2 underground or convert it into products. It's also worth noting that the energy that's produced in this process is carbon negative, but it's also much more expensive than other forms of other forms of energy. Biomass includes forestry and agricultural waste. Think about peach pits and almond skins and rice hulls. Those are all kind of popular biomass inputs, which is pyrolyzed or burned in oxygen-free, modular, widely available containers. Pyrolyzers can be small scale, think like the size of a Weber grill, and larger scale industrial facilities with huge capacities. There are opportunities for the design community to help bikers scale by finding opportunities to use it, while other CDR solutions, carbon dioxide removal solutions, scale up. For example, biochar, a valuable biker's output, can be used by landscape architects as a method for capturing and storing CO2 in the soil. This method also benefits soil health and increases plant productivity, as well as reducing runoff. Design community members can also specify low-embodied concrete mixed with biochar for applications across the built environment. Additionally, designers can advocate for ongoing R&D of fossil-free additives derived from bikers, which can be used in the production of biodegradable plastics needed to reduce and remove carbon emissions. There are organizations around the world advocating and supporting the wide-scale production and use of biochar, and Lou will speak later to some of the ways it's being used in various innovative products. But for now, we're going to move on to direct air capture. We've covered a nature-based and a hybrid solution. Direct air capture, or DAC, is entirely technological. DAC refers to technologies designed for removing excess CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it safely deep underground or using it in a wide variety of products. Since this is a purely technological solution, unlike nature-based approaches, the carbon removal and its storage are completely different processes. Direct air capture is usually paired with underground carbon sequestration, where the CO2 is pumped into deep underground rock formations, where it changes form and chemically bonds with the rock. This is a very permanent way to store excess CO2, but it's expensive, both the direct air capture part and the storage part, and it can't be converted into a high-value product if it's being pumped underground. I want us to just take a moment to recognize direct air capture is different from carbon capture and storage, CCS, which you might have heard of. CCS captures emissions at an emission point, like a smokestack, whereas direct air capture is taking the CO2 from the ambient air. There are a lot of different DAC designs, but they all have these basic elements where air is taken in, often through some kind of fan. The CO2 is separated out of the air using some kind of sorbent, and then the CO2 is recovered from that filter and either pumped underground or converted into some kind of valuable product. Climeworks, which is the best known DAC company, recently opened its second industrial scale plant, which can remove tens of thousands of tons of CO2 per year and store it underground. Climeworks' facilities are co-located with geothermal power sources, which helps it address the high cost associated with DAC's high energy needs. And they're located in places with enough underground basalt rock formations to lock in all the CO2 that they're removing from the air. But even so, this process is very expensive. Costs are expected to decrease in the coming years. And last year, the US Department of Energy opened funding applications for up to $1.8 billion in regional DAC hubs and up to $1.3 billion for point source carbon capture. While DAC will almost certainly be a substantial part of our portfolio of climate solutions, it's important to note that our capacity for carbon removal via DAC is still a drop in the bucket compared to the scale of our challenge. For context, globally, there are hundreds of billions of tons of excess CO2 in our atmosphere, and we're adding tens of billions of tons every year. In 1 year, Vermont, which has the lowest energy-related CO2 emissions of all the US states, emits 260 times more CO2 than Climeworks can remove. We've got a lot of work to do. So on that happy note, let's move on to our last category, carbon utilization. So remember how DAC was all about the carbon removal rather than the storage. This is just the opposite. The CO2 can come from anywhere, although it's usually from DAC, and utilization is all about what you do with it. Now that there's more recognition that we will need to remove an incredible quantity of CO2 from our atmosphere, people are starting to ask where we'll put it all. While we could theoretically pump all of it underground, there are many reasons that that isn't practical, but we are discovering more and more uses for carbon tech products, as they're called, which convert CO2 into all kinds of materials. To help spur innovation and research, the Department of Energy has made $100 million available through a new carbon utilization program. Along with addressing the important question of what do we do with all this excess CO2, carbon utilization is really exciting because it can serve massive global markets with new carbon tech alternatives to ubiquitous environmentally harmful products. Some of the biggest categories of those products are transportation fuels, which include new alternatives to gasoline, diesel, and jet fuels, opportunities in the built environment, including low-embodied carbon cement, concrete, asphalt, and aggregates, and plastics, with new options for polyethylene, polypropylene, and others made from petrochemicals. In order for these products to take off, they need to become cost competitive with incumbents. And this is tough because the cost of removing the CO2 needed as inputs on its own is steep. Then there's the cost of converting the CO2 into a new product and getting buy-in from customers. Remember the Rogers curve. We're still in the early days and we need everyone's participation to move these solutions into the mainstream so that their production can become more efficient and cost effective. But there are lots of inspiring innovations that are making us optimistic about the future. So Lou, let's hear about them.
Great, thank you. So let's talk about design for decarbonization. What does it mean to design for decarbonization? Design for decarbonization harnesses the power of the design disciplines that shape the built environment everywhere to decarbonize its architecture, which would be its interiors, exteriors, and landscapes, and all the products and packaging used within it. That's a significant scope. With that in mind, how have you advanced climate solutions in your work so far? Back to Erica.
Once again, please take a moment to enter your responses. This is an open-ended question, and we'd love to hear how all of you have been doing this already in your work. It'll take just a moment for it to appear. I haven't. Thank you for your honesty, and hopefully you'll come out of this with some exciting opportunities that you're ready to pursue. I'll give everyone a few moments to add in their thoughts. considering the impact of choices on the environment. That's a great one. Honestly, there's a lot out there that just some extra thought can really have an impact in the carbon footprint of our designs. Increased circularity efforts, material selections, reupholstering versus purchasing new, not using as many poly-based fabrics. Yes, material selection is great. Looking deeper into sourcing choices. Oh, this is interesting. This many options. I don't know how to. There we go. I can scroll down. Beautiful.
A lot of great interaction.
Daunting to think about. Yeah, absolutely. Educating yourself, focusing on quality and longevity. I like that. Choosing and suggesting sustainable products. Great. Thank you all.
So this brings us to what can design do? Carbon utilization is a crucial and creative pathway for design for decarbonization. And here are several different examples of how others are designing for decarbonization in new ways. 12, which is a West Coast company, transforms CO2 waste into chemicals that have the same properties as petrochemicals to make polymers and sustainable aviation fuel. Among the companies they've worked with is Mercedes-Benz, and they've made plastic parts and polyurethane foam by transforming CO2 into chemicals that could create these products without the use of petrochemicals whatsoever. Blue Planet Systems, another West Coast company, converts CO2 into calcium carbonate, which is essentially limestone, to produce a synthetic limestone aggregate for concrete production. Why is that important? Because concrete is the second most widely used material on Earth next to water. It's also interesting to note there are many other companies creating this kind of conversion, but in different ways. One of them is a company called Carbon Cure, which is converting CO2 into synthetic limestone to make low-embodied concrete. And last year, Steelcase supported the development of Carbon Cure's carbon removal technology, recognizing it's essential to achieving net zero. Carbon Upcycling is yet another company. It's using waste and carbon utilization to unlock new frontier of circular materials. Their technology combines CO2 with industrial byproducts and natural materials to improve the performance of cement and plastics and consumer products and fertilizers and even pharmaceuticals. Carbon Upcycling's venture with Element Beauty Group creates the world's first captured carbon packaging for the beauty and wellness industries. And so again, going back to the Rogers curve, this may seem small and one-off, but it's in the very early phase. Thinking about this as a multiplier over the course of decades, this could become the norm in the future. Carbon 2X introduces the world's first biodegradable plastic made entirely from CO2. They believe this next generation of plastics redefines sustainability for toys, cosmetics, food packaging, and consumer electronics because it is produced fossil-free and leaves no microplastics behind. Cast Carbon combines biochar, which you've now learned about, with natural clay, fibers, and binding minerals to make circular, biodegradable materials for the built environment that sequester carbon. Paper Shell and Arbor. The paper used to produce the seat utilizes residues from Swedish wood production, such as sawdust and chips and branches, a form of biomass. And at the end of its life cycle, the seat shell can be pyrolyzed, which converts it to biochar. And this effectively locks in the CO2 and avoids its release into the atmosphere. And Vestry outdoor furniture is produced with fossil-free steel. It's made at the SSAB plant in Sweden. SSAB fossil-free steel is produced using a new technology that reduces iron ore using fossil-free hydrogen that emits water instead of CO2. We have to keep in mind no one solution or discipline, organization, field, or industry can solve the climate crisis alone. So what can design do? Collaborate across disciplines. We need complementary skill sets and mindsets to create more comprehensive climate solutions. Collaborate across industries. Carbon tech is a new growth industry with opportunities that apply across the design disciplines, which you've just seen. We need to collaborate with suppliers. New climate positive products are coming to market because the supply and demand worked together. We need to collaborate through policy because policy sets the bounds for how we build everywhere, and design should have a seat at the policy table. We need to advance carbon utilization because it combines circular design and climate action to make a significant impact. And we can advance climate action faster by working together. What can design do? A lot. And the history of innovation, its timescales, and its positive impacts offer good reasons to be optimistic about what design can do. So how to participate? Engaging everyone. First, we can stay informed versus overwhelmed. Feels so much better. And in just a few minutes, it's really easy. A couple of examples. The Daily Difference is published every day from the Carbon Almanac Network. It's free. You can read it in probably a minute, and it's an easy way to stay informed. Bloomberg Green, also free, takes a couple of minutes to read. It's more of a business view, but it's all accessible language. We can apply a climate action framework. Use a climate action framework to guide your sustainability goals comprehensively. We can join an advocacy group. Groups vary from city to state, national to international, and include industry-focused groups too. The more you stay informed and build awareness, the better you can advocate for your point of view. In Michigan alone, there are lots of opportunities, and these exist in states and countries everywhere. But I'll cite a few examples just in the Michigan area and in Grand Rapids in particular. The city of Grand Rapids has a program called Grand Rapids Building Policies and Programs for Equitable, Healthy, and Zero Carbon Buildings. That's a significant effort, and there's an opportunity to at least find out what they're doing if you're not already aware. A more grassroots effort is the Grand Rapids Climate Coalition. And it's an interesting growing alliance of individuals, community groups, neighborhood associations, nonprofits, faith groups, businesses, and educational institutions. And then the University of Michigan has the Graham Sustainability Institute and the Center for Empowering Communities. And what are they focused on? To foster decarbonization solutions that advance community goals and priorities. Next, we can reduce and remove to decarbonize. Discover new ways to pursue emissions reduction and carbon removal in parallel. It's not an either or, it is a both and decision. Last, faster. We can idle restoring our climate together now. What type of participation resonates most with you? Erica?
Oh, sorry, I'll go back to the QR code for just a moment here. So please take a moment and participate in this second to final, mostly final interactive portion. So this is a ranking exercise so we can see what type of participation resonates most with our audience today. So far, learning is in the lead. Applying a climate action framework is pulling up ahead. Note that you are not forced to rank all options if any one of them seems like it's just not your thing. But great to see how these evolve as responses come in, staying informed, learning, staying right up in the lead. Yeah, I think the more you learn, the more other opportunities to participate become visible to you. So I think that's a great way to start for those of you who are newer to this um, area, staying informed of climate resources. Great. Thank you so much for your participation. And from here, we'll move into some takeaways. We've covered a lot. Here is what we hope you've learned. Climate action goes beyond reducing emissions, which is what most of us are most familiar with. Climate action stands on three pillars. Carbon removal is necessary and at incredibly large scale. Carbon utilization is a new frontier with huge opportunities. And I hope that that's an area that all of you will get to delve into more in your careers. Design for decarbonization matters. It can catalyze a critical shift in our world and our climate. And we need all hands on deck. Everyone has a role to play. One more QR code for you. This is to lot 21, and I'll let Lou close us out.
Thank you. Thanks, Erica, and thanks to everyone who's been participating in the interactive exercises. It's really terrific to see that happen. Thanks for spending this valuable time with us today and discover new ways to design for decarbonization. You can scan this code, which will take you to lot21.org. You can follow us on LinkedIn, of course, or Instagram, and you can subscribe to our free quarterly newsletter. It's designed to be browsed in a quarter hour, and then you can dive deeper anytime. Every quarterly ends with our listening and reading suggestions, and they connect you to podcasts and articles and videos for those actively engaged in climate action worldwide. So it's an easy way to gain different perspectives that can help frame your own view. Thank you. And back to Eileen.
Thank you so much, Lou and Erica. That was really wonderful and jam-packed with a lot of deep but simplified information for us all to digest. And I love that you ended with that list of resources and what Lot 21 is doing to really hit on learning more, getting access to those resources as a very simple but tangible takeaway that we can all take after leaving today. We did get a few questions in the chat. And so I'm going to throw out a couple from when Erica, you were speaking in the first half of the webinar. And so a quick question around, how does burning a plant capture the carbon, but not when a tree is burned?
Yes, great question. And it has to do with the environment in which the plant is burned. So I showed that picture of the hydrolyzer, that sort of barrel-shaped machine. That is an environment in which you can burn plants in an oxygen-starved environment, which instead of releasing the CO2, locks it into a material that's sort of like charcoal. That's the biochar that we were talking about. Whereas a wildfire, for example, you're out in the ambient air, nothing's being captured. All of that CO2 is just being released as the oxygen is feeding the flames. So that makes all the difference. Also, if you're using burning plants to produce energy, that's again in an enclosed environment where you're capturing that CO2 that's being produced and using the heat to produce energy.
Great. Thank you so much for that simple and easy to understand explanation around the difference. So next question of, what is the impact of using trees to build on the CO2 stored in the trees?
The impact of using trees to build on the CO2 stored in trees. I'm not totally understanding the question. Lou, do you?
No, I have the same question. I'm curious whether the person who submitted the question was thinking about the duration of the tree itself as in, as it grows, it continues to consume more CO2. But then there's a cutoff point where the tree is going to die, and then it reverses the process where that CO2 is through the decay process is going to be re-released. I'm curious whether that's what was in mind.
Great. And if whoever asked that question, if that was not the answer you were looking for, if you want to retype it, we will get back to that.
Yeah, that's
Thank
great.
you. And so what would you feel is the most successful carbon-based material in terms of cost to functionality? Is there a straight answer to that?
I'll
Curious what you think, Lou, but
yeah, I
I can
don't,
jump in with my favorite.
go ahead.
Lou talked about Blue Planet. I happen to be biased because they're located right near me, but also because what they do is they take CO2 and convert it into aggregates that can be used in concrete. Their processes takes very little energy. It does not require a lot of CO2 purification, which can be one of the costlier parts of converting CO2 into products. And CO2 is the second most used material on, or sorry, concrete is the second most used material on Earth after water. So the scalability of that solution is really huge. And with the existing tax credits that are available in the US, the cost of this like synthetic aggregate that's made from CO2 is cost competitive with alternatives.
I would fully agree. To build on that, if we looked at the most widely used materials in the world, concrete at the top, it's also where we see the majority of activity worldwide, which is good. Next, you have steel. Steel lags considerably behind, but we see good examples around the world of low embodied steel methods, manufacturing methods. So what needs to happen there? The energy used to produce it needs to come down. The means of the production needs to also become more efficient so that it can scale up. There'll be a cutoff point at which it can't get better than the low embodied threshold while maintaining the performance of steel. But the difference between where we are today and where we were just 5 years ago is pretty significant. And if we go back to how long it takes for technologies to evolve, think about where we were with solar 20 or 30 years ago. And we fast forward to where might we be with steel or aluminum, glass, and plastic in another 20, 30 years, given the evolution of where they all are. And those are the most widely used materials. There's reason for hope.
That's great. Yeah, and to call out, like, remembering that there have been changes over time, that it can feel daunting as we look forward, but just by looking back and seeing how far we have come can help instill a little bit of that hope as well.
Yes.
Before I move on to sort of a different question in a different realm, I'm going to clarify that last question. So you had mentioned that rotting trees and burning trees releases the CO2. And so the question was, how does that compare to using the wood in a product? So in other words, should we be using wood to build if we wish to lessen the embedded CO2 or let the trees stand?
Got it. Yes, that is a great question. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, so it really depends on the context, but in general, wood is a product that can be used sustainably in building if it is done responsibly. If you're clear cutting a forest, obviously that is going to cause a lot of harm, even though the carbon in the trees that have been cut down is not going to be re-released into the atmosphere. There aren't trees now in that area that are continuing to absorb more CO2. So that's kind of a net loss. But Lou, you probably have more details than I do on how to be really responsible about using wood.
I agree with what you've said. I look to the forestry stewardship movement, which began decades ago, which essentially looks at this as a regenerative resource, but it's all about how it is maintained. So earlier when Erica was talking about forest carbon practices, she mentioned forestry management. And that's a critical part of how we maintain this natural resource worldwide. So clear cutting, obviously not effective, but managing forests well, whereby you're cycling the growth. You're growing new trees, you're removing trees, and you're cycling constantly in cycles that are relative to the species of trees and the biodiversity necessary to sustain a healthy forest. So it is an outstanding resource. There's no reason to stop using wood, and knowing that you use FSC sources, Forestry Stewardship Council sources, you're in good hands.
Great. I love the point that we really have to, it's not a single answer, but look at the balance of these things as we make these choices
Correct.
into the future. One last quick question that I'm sure warrants more time, but I'll give you just a quick minute to answer this one. How do we overcome some of the political roadblocks that might prevent progress for climate action?
Erica, I'll
One
let you start.
strategy, yeah. One great strategy is to pivot from making this an environmental or climate argument to making it an economic one. If we're purely using extractive practices, ultimately we're going to run out of resources. But if we're learning ways to turn waste into economic value, then we're creating jobs, we're spurring the economic activity in different regions. And so really leaning on those arguments can help get around the politics.
Great. So it sounds like speaking the language too that we already speak when people listen.
Yes.
Well, great. We want to thank you so much, Lou and Erica, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and expertise. To everybody on the call, we want to make sure to share some additional resources with you in case you're interested for more information. So as Lou and Erica mentioned, you can find out more about Lot 21 at lot21.org, and they have, again, a plethora of resources to take a look at. So we strongly encourage you just to kind of poke around on their website. And of course, Steelcase, we released our 2024 impact report late last year, which you can access by visiting steelcase.com. And we are also going to send you an email with this recording and any relevant resources that were discussed today. So we hope we have a great rest of your day. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Thanks very much for having us.